Hey guys, and welcome to the bonus part 3 of my exploration and restoration of the Compaq Deskpro XL 466 machine that I bought a little while ago. This is going to be a much more casual video than the first two, not scripted at all, really, at least at this point, and hopefully much shorter. So as you can see, I've got the case off here, and that's because I just want to show you really one thing. I had hoped to have a couple of things to show you guys in this video, but I'm just going to try something and hopefully show you the results. So let's just get started. So if you watched part 1 and part 2, you probably saw this giant card with a big green heatsink on it at different points in the video. That is a processor card. And I mentioned in part 1 that I thought, potentially just buy another processor card and stick it in there. And the one that I showed in part 1 of the video, I ended up just buying it. So I'm going to put that in here today, see how it works. That is a Pentium 100 board. This is a 486 board, and I'm just going to kind of put them in there, see how plug and play it is, and just compare some benchmarks, I guess, and some gameplay for you guys. First, a little digression into the world of 486 upgrades. It's actually a pretty complicated and pretty dry topic, so I'm not going to cover the whole shebang here, but some top-line items are worth mentioning. Say you had a crappy little 486 SX25 like I did back in the 90s. What were your upgrade paths? Well, this was the early days of the ZIF socket, which lets you drop in another chip from the same family. The 486 used 4 different socket designs, depending on the year and maybe whatever the manufacturer had lying around. Some machines were really cheap and didn't even have this. Instead, they had chips soldered onto the motherboard. In those cases, you were SOL unless your computer had a separate upgrade socket, which some did. Mine luckily had a socket 3, though it also had a locked 25 MHz frontside bus, so the only real upgrades I could make were to either 50 or 75 MHz CPUs, and I did eventually upgrade to a 486 DX250. Hey, doubling the raw speed and adding a floating point unit was actually pretty major. Upgrading to a Pentium class processor was trickier. You couldn't just drop a Pentium into, say, a socket 2 or 3 socket. So you either needed a new motherboard, something that wasn't easy in the days before the ATX standard, when basically every motherboard was proprietary, or you needed a special Pentium class upgrade chip. Intel sold Pentium overdrive chips that ran at odd clock speeds like 63 or 83 MHz. But AMD, Cyrix, and others also sold 586 class chips meant to give you Pentium performance, or close to it. These all had their pros and cons. Floating point performance was the biggest disadvantage, as they were more like faster 486s than true Pentiums. The Intel overdrive chips ran closest to the overall performance of a full Pentium, though if your motherboard didn't support write-back cache, and mine at the time did not, that would pretty severely cripple performance. Given the high price of these chips, most people just decided to upgrade their entire system instead. Nowadays, overdrive chips are actually somewhat collectible due to their rarity. The too long didn't read version is that while it was usually possible to upgrade a 486 to a quote-unquote Pentium class machine, it usually wasn't worth it, and there were always performance compromises. And then there was Compaq. And maybe others, but Compaq is what I have, and their approach to upgrade paths was quite different. They just put the CPU and everything it needs to fully work on its own expansion card and its own high-bandwidth proprietary slot in the motherboard. So not only do you end up with probably the most badass-looking expansion cards ever made, but you could use one to upgrade from a stock 486 to a full-fledged Pentium with all the trimmings. I couldn't find an original MSRP on Compaq processor boards, but I have to believe the only downside would have been price, since you're paying for a lot more than just the processor itself when you buy one of these. It wouldn't surprise me if the cost of one of these processor boards was the same as your average entire home computer. And you can even theoretically upgrade these processor boards themselves, since they're socketed too. It's tricky. They seem to have epoxied the CPUs to the heatsinks, and the Pentium heatsink prevents the socket lever holding the CPU in place from moving, but people have done it. The 486 heatsink is much smaller, so that would be an easier upgrade. And I'd love to try a Pentium overdrive chip in it someday, but not at modern day prices. Okay, so today I'm going to be doing actual VGA capture on this machine. This is my first time trying that. Just got myself a new capture card. It's in my modern PC there. As you can see, I've had to kind of jury-rig myself a table with the Deskpro on it because my 6-foot VGA cable to get from one computer to the other hasn't arrived yet. So decided I wasn't going to wait for that anymore, though. We're just going to plow forward, and all of the in-computer footage that you're going to see from this point on is going to be through VGA capture. No more just pointing the camera at the screen and getting moire effects and all that. So let's just take a look at some benchmarks and some games. This is going to be from the 486 first, and then I'll switch over and we'll get the Pentium 100 installed and do some more tests on that. Okay, here I am booting into the Deskpro, and I think this is so cool. I've never been able to do this before with VGA capture. But anyway, you see I'm still getting the failed set block mode command error that I was getting in my last video. I haven't cleared that up yet, although I am working on it. But we're just going to pass that. It doesn't seem to do anything. And just get into the system configuration utility here. We'll just look at the details here. This is my BIOS. Capturing BIOS screens. How cool is that? You see we've got this 486W system ROM information, and down here we have the 486DX2 at 66 megahertz. So that's what's in there right now. Let's just exit out of here. And that's it. We're booted up. Let's run some benchmarks again. From Phil's computer lab. You saw some of these before. It does that sometimes. Saw some of these in my last video, but not to this level of quality. So let's just run a couple of them again, and then we'll compare against the Pentium 100. Anyway, we'll quit back to DOS, and let's just try running a couple games. So, CD games, Doom 2, and we'll see if that's going to be centered when the game starts. If not, I'll just center it. Yep, it's centered. Really doesn't run too bad. But Doom and Doom 2 have never been bad on this computer. Let's try something a little more demanding. Let's try Destruction Derby. This game, despite being pretty low resolution, just runs at a pretty low frame rate on a 486. Let's just get into some gameplay. Go. And I don't know what I'm doing in this game. I don't have a gamepad right now. I do have a joystick, but it's not hooked up.
Yo! Second place.
This game is pretty fun, though. Ay, ay, ay.
Third place. Watch those barriers. They'll only slow you down.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, second place.
Where the hell am I?
Place.
Anyway, it's a pretty fun game, but it doesn't run at a great frame rate on a 486. Let's check out something else. Just quickly here again, I'll go through a little bit of Fallout. I'm not going to do too much because I've already shown you this game a bunch of times, but it is a game that technically requires a Pentium 90. So I just wanted to show, you know, what it looks like running on a 486. A lot of games in those days would run on CPUs lower than their supposedly required minimum. I can't show that audio, but they just wouldn't run well. And I showed a few of those actually in my previous video. Another one was SimCity 3000. They'll run on a 486, but they just run like crap. There we go. Attack him from way back here with the knife. It's not gonna work. Alright, there you go, dude. Go attack that guy. Okay, so that's Fallout. See, scrolling on the S3 actually works pretty good. You know, it's not that bad. It's just not really the way the game is meant to be played. So we'll look at that again. And we're back here at the Deskpro. Once I put this new card in here, it's going to be a full Pentium machine. So all the performance and all the compatibility should be pretty much like a real Pentium. So let's just take a look. Okay, so here we are on the first boot. You see it's given us a couple of errors. Let me just get those centered again. So we've got a different processor, we've got different memory. The Pentium 100 board does have 16 megabytes on board. My 486 card has 24 total installed, 8 megs on board, 16 megs extra. I can always move that over, but I'll do that at a different time. Just hit F1, and then I'll get into the configuration utility, otherwise known as the BIOS. Let's just let it auto configure. It's changed the system board for me. We'll just look and see what it says. There we go, Pentium at 100 megahertz. So it's recognizing the board and the CPU. So that's probably all we need to do. Let's just say we're done. We'll save and exit. Restart. And hopefully we're just in business. Famous last words, right? No more processor or memory errors. Looks like we've got a pretty normal startup. Just hit DOS Bench again. Okay, and same thing, 3D Bench 1.0 C. Pretty good, 87.9. I'd say it's using the new CPU. We'll do Chris's 3D benchmark again. Okay, 28.6 and 17.1 frames per second. Again, we're expecting all of these to be better, and they are. Go Doom Max Details. Or details. Every once in a while there's a hitch or two, and that's actually when it's hitting the CD-ROM drive. You can install this, or just copy the files over to a hard drive or CF card. I just haven't done it. I've just left it on a CD for portability's sake, and there's no real need to install it. So I don't know if that's being counted in these numbers. But anyway, there's the game ticks and real ticks, and once again, I'll figure that out, what that equates to as far as frames per second. Here we go with the QuakeTime demo. And this is significantly faster. Like, this was basically unplayable on a 486. And that's got to be the floating point performance. 23.1 FPS. So that is, what is that? That's 3 times the performance, basically. And we'll look at system information. And there you go, about 317 versus a Pentium 66. Here's a handy graph that shows the percentage improvement over the 486 with the Pentium 100 installed. Feel free to pause now if you want to look more closely at this. So let's quit back to DOS, and we'll run some of the other things that we ran earlier, not D. We'll go to C, Games, Doom 2. This is going a lot quicker because it's just a faster CPU. So this is not hugely different because it wasn't that bad to begin with. Doom is one of the better running games on a 486. Doom 2 uses pretty much the same engine, as far as I know. Sure looks the same. A little smoother in here. But yeah, anyway. So let's try Destruction Derby again. I'm actually quite curious how well this runs. That is significantly better. I mean, it's still 320 by 200, but that is a lot smoother, as you'd expect. But at least it shows there wasn't some kind of artificial constraint that the developers put on it. Let's just play a little bit. And just in case you're wondering, no, there is not an option for a higher resolution. There is an option for details, but it's 320 by 200, and that's it.
Yo! Second place. A second place. Watch those fine plays. Fine plays.
It's pretty buttery smooth. I mean, for a game like this, of this era. It's probably running about 20-25 frames per second, but it's doing it consistently. I'm not seeing any drops.
Second place. Nice. Ooh.
Okay, so that's pretty cool.
Second place.
Let's take a look at Fallout again. Running on a processor that it was actually made for. Well, here's something interesting. I think I know what's going on here. In DOS, Fallout actually technically requires 32 megs of RAM, from what I remember. That was a lot at the time. I had 24 megs on my 486 board, and it worked fine. I have 16 on this Pentium 100, and it's obviously, well, not obviously, but it seems like it's not enough. It's not telling me what the error is, that it's just dumping me back in here, but let's just head on over to Windows anyway, because I want to try some things there, and I'll be right back. Okay, and here we are in Windows, and I love the startup sound. I'm going to try Fallout. I have actually already installed it, so I'm pretty sure I just need to run it. Where is it? Where is it? Interplay. And we'll see how well this runs. I'll register that later. Yeah, let's forfeit that. To be honest, this is the second time that I've filmed this. The first time the phase was off on the capture. Again, this is testing that as well, this video. And everything was really super blurry on the Windows desktop, so I'm just filming it again. I know this is going to work. It didn't work on the 486, but it's working now. So it didn't work on the 486, and it didn't work in DOS because of the RAM, but in Windows, I'm sure I mentioned this already, it only requires 16 megs rather than 32. So we will just get going, and I'll show you how it plays. It's honestly not that much different from the 486, at least the beginning of the game. I don't have any save games or anything on here, so we're just seeing the beginning of the game. And, you know, obviously there's more going on later in the game, but, you know, like I said in my last video, it's not an action game, so it was always kind of slow. And even on a Pentium 100, you're going to see it's still pretty slow. That's just how Fallout was. It's an RPG. It was kind of a traditional RPG when it first started out. It was not the first-person shooter kind of thing that it became later. But here we go. And do I have... I'm pretty sure I already have a knife. I'm not even going to search that guy this time. Let me just get my knife ready so I can get rid of these rats. Oh, shoot. There we go. So, you know, I'm walking around. It's fine. But this is about how it should be running, I guess. But again, you don't really notice that much of a difference from the 486. So I'll just show you scrolling. It hitches a little the first time because it's loading, but Scrolling's definitely faster, so that's good. And again, when I played this before, I played, a lot of the game on a 486 and then upgraded to a Pentium somewhere in the middle of it, and I'm pretty sure I felt the same way at the time. Like, oh yeah, it's a little better, but it's not hugely different. So anyway, let's exit out of this. So let's try Close Combat, which I don't know if you remember was also borderline unplayable on the 486, although I was really happy to even just have it running. But this game is just... all right, let me switch the color depth here. I'll be right back. Okay, as I was saying, this is a game that's slow pretty much all the time. Like, the animations are just slow. So, you're going to see a difference from the way it looked in the last video, but it's not going to be huge. So, but stuff like this is loading a lot faster. This was almost unbearable, this wait on the 486. And now it's not instant, but pretty much okay. I'm just going to start. And where's my tank? Oh, I have a tank and a half track this time. I didn't have that last time I played this. My tank, which will be immediately blown up. Something's going on. Okay, the tank is shooting. Okay, there we got scrolling going. It's fine. It's better. But let me show you something a little more action-oriented now. So we'll try playing some Grand Theft Auto again. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. This is one of the less well balanced CDs that I have. It always sounds like it's going to tear apart my CD-ROM drive, and it's always been that way. It is a store-bought CD. Okay, this is at 640 by 480. Now let's just play. And this is a lot better. This is definitely... That was just loading, that little hitch up there. Hey, let me get that gun. I don't have a joystick or anything, and sometimes this keyboard... There we go. I don't know if it's I think it's the connector or something on this keyboard is starting to go. Alrighty. Back in the car. It's loading again. And my keyboard is not fully working. One sec. There we go. Yeah, I don't know if it's my keyboard or if it's the connector on the computer. That might be something I need to look at some point, but I've had that problem a few times where it just kind of stops registering certain key presses until I jiggle the connector. But yeah, this is the way this game is supposed to be played. Well, I mean, not this poorly, but this is the way it's supposed to run. So the question is, now that I have this and it works, am I going to put the 486 board back in? Well, probably not. You know, I did originally want to have a 486. That's what I originally had back in the day. But when I had my 486, I was constantly wishing I had something better. And I talked in the last video about the temptation to just keep upgrading stuff in the modern era until you just have a modern PC. Why even have a retro PC? But I realized as I was putting this together, fixing it up, restoring it, that most of my favorite games that I remember of that time actually did not run well or at all on a 486. Most of my favorite games were Pentium era games. So I'm probably going to leave this in. If I ever want to test something on the 486, I have a 486 board. Just put it in, it's a 486 again. That's the great thing about these machines. They're kind of many machines in one. I kind of lucked out with this machine, I think. I'm really happy that I got this particular machine for that reason. It's very easy to upgrade. It can run anything from a 486-25, SX25, up to a Pentium 233 MMX. And it can do that theoretically on just 3 processor boards. You can replace the processors, but it's just you got to get the old processors out, which is I have found out not an easy thing to do. Anyway, I'll probably just keep going with my 486 and Pentium 100. Maybe at some point I'll pick up the Pentium Pro processor board if I find one. But otherwise, just a fun little thing to play around with. And now I have a Pentium 100 that can run pretty much anything that I would want from that era and do it just fine. So that's about it for this video. Keep checking back. I might have more on this machine coming up in a little while. There are a couple requests that people have made for some videos that I actually thought might be fun to do. So just keep a lookout. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.